At my sister's wedding celebration, my mother made a false accusation against my innocent son, who was 10 years old. She claimed he had stolen my sister's gold-plated iPhone, which was valued at $3,000. My mother then physically assaulted him. She slapped him and tugged his hair forcefully. When I quickly moved to shield my son, she yelled out for everyone present to hear, declaring, "You and your son are thieves." Following this outburst, she grasped a heavy decorative object and struck me on the head with such force that I cried out due to the intense pain. However, later on, the real facts of the situation were revealed. My name is Victoria, and I am 32 years old. Currently, my 10-year-old son, Leo, and I experience a peaceful existence. Nevertheless, the path that led us to this point was anything but tranquil. I was born into a household where affection was not dispensed equally. My mother, Madison, consistently showed favoritism towards my younger sister, Vanessa. From the earliest stages, it was apparent that Vanessa was the daughter who was perceived as faultless, the cherished child who merited all commendation and fondness. In contrast, I was the overlooked one, the daughter considered too quiet, too ordinary, too easy to disregard. The sole individual who genuinely loved me for who I was, who made me feel acknowledged, was my father. He would routinely draw me aside after one of Madison's critical remarks, kneel down to my level and assure me, "You are the true essence of this family, Victoria. Never allow anyone to persuade you otherwise." He served as my refuge, my steadfast support. Yet, life possesses a cruel tendency to take away those we can least bear to lose. When I was merely 21, my father suffered an abrupt heart attack. His passing devastated me in ways language could never convey, and left me exposed to Madison's coldness and biased treatment. Following my father's funeral services, it was as though Madison no longer felt the need to acknowledge my presence. Vanessa became her singular focus, the brilliant luminary, while I transformed into the invisible daughter, barely tolerated within the confines of the dwelling I had once considered my home. Despite this, I persevered. I dedicated myself entirely to my studies, earned a degree in accounting, and endeavored to construct a future where I would not be dependent on anyone else. My aspirations were not centered on grand accomplishments, but rather on simple hopes for a calm life where kindness held greater significance than outward appearances. Then, at a time when I least anticipated it, I encountered Thomas. Thomas was neither extravagant nor wealthy. He was a diligent construction worker possessing a slightly crooked smile and warm brown eyes. Our meeting occurred at a relaxed backyard barbecue hosted by a mutual friend. Both of us felt somewhat out of place, a bit reserved, and yet we connected instantaneously. He appreciated that I was not boisterous and attention-seeking like others. I appreciated that he truly listened when I spoke. Our relationship progressed rapidly, but it never felt hurried. It felt appropriate. Despite Madison's obvious disapproval and Vanessa's relentless ridicule, Thomas and I exchanged vows in a modest courthouse ceremony, attended by a few supportive companions. For the initial time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging to someone who had chosen me, not for superficial reasons or social standing, but for the person I was internally. I had little awareness that life still held further trials awaiting me. Thomas and I did not possess many material possessions, but what we shared was genuine. Our modest one-bedroom apartment featured noisy floorboards and deteriorating paint, yet it was filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and unpretentious aspirations. For the initial time, I resided in a place where love was not something one had to earn. It was given unconditionally. Less than a year after our marriage, we received the news that fundamentally altered everything. I was expecting a child. I vividly recall clutching that tiny test strip, gazing at the positive indication with tears streaming down my face. My tears were not born of fear. For the first time in my existence, I was weeping due to hope. When I informed Thomas, he lifted me into the air, twirling me around while laughing and exclaiming, "We are going to be a family, Vic, a genuine family." Those subsequent months were occupied with planning, saving money, and making preparations. Thomas undertook additional work shifts at the construction site, and I accepted freelance accounting assignments to complete from home. We carefully managed our finances, excited about building a future for the child we already cherished more than anything. Thomas constructed a crib with his own hands, painting it a gentle shade of blue. He would read aloud from baby care books in the evenings, his deep voice filling the room with light-hearted narratives. We engaged in playful disagreements about potential baby names, not in earnest, but the sort of exchanges where amusement superseded serious discussion. 9 months later, following a prolonged and difficult labor, Leo was born. My son, my precious miracle. He possessed Thomas's warm brown hair and my large blue eyes. From the very moment I held him, something within me began to mend. as though all the invisible wounds of my past had found their soothing balm. Thomas wept openly when he first held Leo. "You created something perfect," he whispered, gently kissing my forehead. For 6 wonderful months our small family flourished. I would awaken to the sound of Thomas softly singing Leo to sleep after early morning feedings. His hands, roughened by construction work, were somehow incredibly tender with our son. The apartment may have been small in size, but it overflowed with profound affection. And then, in a cruel turn of destiny, everything fell apart. It was a rainy Tuesday when Thomas did not return home. Initially, I thought perhaps he had stayed later at work to earn extra hours. But when I saw 2 construction supervisors standing at my doorstep, their hats held in their hands and their faces pale, I instantly knew. The scaffolding had collapsed. Thomas had fallen from the 3rd story. He had perished instantly upon impact. The sorrow was overwhelming. It consumed everything. The laughter, the optimism, even the illumination from the windows seemed to dim. I went through the motions of attending the funeral, barely conscious of anything except the crushing burden of my loss. I held Leo more tightly each night, whispering promises I was uncertain I could uphold. It was not merely my heart that was broken that day. It was my future. Returning to Madison's residence was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of survival. After Thomas's death, the modest savings we had painstakingly accumulated vanished within a few months, consumed by rent, household bills, formula for Leo, and medical appointments. I attempted to secure additional freelance work, but grief clouded my mental clarity. I was unable to keep pace. There was no alternative place for us to go. Consequently, one overcast afternoon, cradling a 6-month-old Leo securely wrapped in my arms, I knocked upon the front entrance of the dwelling I had once considered my home. Madison answered the door with a tight, disapproving frown, her gaze scanning over me and then down at Leo, as if already calculating the imposition we would represent. Without uttering a single word, she stepped aside and permitted us entry. The chilling atmosphere within the house remained unaltered. Neither had Madison changed, and neither, it appeared, had Vanessa, who glided through the house with an air of superiority, already conducting herself as though she deserved a grand estate. Both of them treated Leo as an unwelcome visitor, an inconvenience. Nonetheless, I repeatedly told myself this arrangement was temporary, merely until I could regain my stability. I worked late into the nights, accepting any remote accounting positions I could secure, and I cared for Leo with every ounce of energy I had remaining. I disregarded Madison's harsh remarks. I tuned out Vanessa's condescending smirks. Time passed by in a quiet, physically demanding blur. Year after year, I continued residing at Madison's house, quietly raising Leo and diligently saving every dollar I could. Leo matured from a cheerful toddler into a bright, compassionate boy who had a fondness for books and playing soccer. Now, after all these years, Leo was 10 years old, intelligent, brave, and the most significant source of joy in my existence. Although we continued to live under Madison's roof, we had emotionally constructed our own small sanctuary of hope and affection within those cold walls. I constantly reassured myself, just a little more time. We are close to being independent. And then, one evening as we were seated at the dinner table, Madison disclosed the news nonchalantly, as if she were commenting on the weather conditions. Vanessa's wedding ceremony is scheduled for the following month. It will be a large event, attended by notable individuals. Everyone of importance will be present. You and your son are expected to attend, but ensure you do not cause any embarrassment to us. I blinked, momentarily taken aback. Leo glanced up at me, confusion evident in his youthful eyes. I nodded slowly, deliberately keeping my voice steady. Of course, I responded softly. Internally, my heart ached painfully. I understood that this invitation was not extended out of love or even familial feeling. It was solely about maintaining appearances. We were nothing more than background elements in Vanessa's meticulously orchestrated world. Despite this, I decided that we would attend not for Madison nor for Vanessa but for Leo because he deserved at least one day where he could feel a sense of belonging. The morning of Vanessa's wedding felt like a heavy burden pressing down upon my chest. I stood before my small mirror, smoothing the fabric of the simple navy blue dress I had acquired secondhand. It was not glamorous, but it was clean and respectable, a reflection of the dignity I still struggled to preserve even when the circumstances sought to strip it away. Leo, now a 10-year-old who was growing taller each day, entered the room wearing his small gray suit and blue necktie. He gazed up at me beaming, his hair neatly styled, his shoes shined. "Mom, do I look presentable?" he inquired, his smile wide enough to melt my heart. "You look absolutely perfect," I replied, bending down to plant a kiss on his forehead. I made a silent promise to myself that regardless of what transpired that day, Leo would feel proud of himself and would know he was deeply cherished. We arrived at the extensive garden venue where the wedding celebration was being hosted, a place overflowing with costly decorations, tables adorned with gold trim, and towering floral arrangements. Immediately, I sensed the scrutiny of numerous eyes upon us. Madison greeted us at the entrance, offering a cold, tight-lipped smile. "You are here," she stated, her gaze sweeping over me from head to toe. Just endeavored to avoid creating any disturbances. Before I could formulate a response, Vanessa glided towards us, radiant in her designer bridal gown. Her makeup was flawless, her hair cascading in expertly styled waves. "Victoria," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to overhear, her voice excessively sweet. "It is so gracious of you to have managed to attend. It truly wouldn't feel like an authentic family occasion without you lingering in the background." Soft laughter from a few guests rippled through the area surrounding us. Leo moved closer to me, his hand lightly touching mine. I gave his hand a quick, comforting squeeze. Inside the grand hall, the lavishness was overwhelming, glittering chandeliers, impressive champagne towers, a live string quartet playing softly. Yet, despite all the sparkle and splendor, the atmosphere felt distinctly cold. We were seated at a table situated far from the main bridal party, tucked away in a corner near the kitchen entrances, sufficiently distant that no one would pay us any attention unless they required someone to discreetly gossip about. I focused my attention on Leo, helping him settle into his chair, forcing smiles, and making light-hearted remarks about the two elaborate place settings and the large quantity of silverware. For his benefit, I was prepared to endure anything. However, throughout the evening, I repeatedly observed Vanessa and Madison conversing in hushed tones behind their hands, casting glances in our direction and smirking like playground bullies conspiring to execute a cruel prank. There was a palpable tension in the air, an almost electrical current I could feel buzzing beneath my skin. Something was imminent, something unpleasant, and I had no comprehension of the extent to which they were prepared to go. Dinner had just commenced when it happened. A piercing shriek abruptly interrupted the elegant music and conversational murmurings. My phone. It was Vanessa, standing near her table, her face contorted with outrage. My gold iPhone. The limited edition model. It's gone missing. A wave of uneasy whispers swept through the assembled guests. I instinctively reached for Leo's hand beneath the table. He looked up at me, confused and apprehensive. Vanessa's eyes darted across the room and settled directly upon Leo. "You!" she exclaimed dramatically, her voice escalating. "You were near our table earlier, weren't you?" Leo's face immediately paled. He shook his head rapidly. "I didn't take anything," he insisted. "Don't you dare tell lies," Madison retorted sharply, her voice as keen as a blade. Gasps arose from adjacent tables. Before I could react further, Madison and Vanessa advanced towards us aggressively. Madison seized Leo roughly by the arm, yanking him abruptly from his chair. Leo whimpered softly, attempting to free himself from her grasp. "Where is it?" Madison demanded fiercely. "Where have you concealed the phone, you little thief?" "I didn't. I swear," Leo cried out, tears already beginning to well up in his wide eyes. I stood up so rapidly that my chair fell over behind me. "Release him," I shouted, my voice trembling with intense anger. But Madison paid no heed. "Naturally you are defending him," she sneered, releasing Leo with a forceful shove. "You likely instructed him, like mother like son." I positioned myself to shield Leo, drawing him in behind me. However, Madison was not finished. In a sudden outburst of rage, she seized a substantial decorative vessel from a nearby table, a fragile-looking object painted gold, intended solely for display purposes, and struck me forcefully against the side of my head. Intense pain erupted across my skull. I staggered sideways, the room spinning uncontrollably, managing to grasp the edge of the table before collapsing. Blood trickled down the side of my face. The reception hall became unnervingly silent. Guests gasped. Some rose from their seats, others whispered in shock. Leo knelt beside me, sobbing uncontrollably. Mom, are you all right?" he cried out. I nodded weakly, my hand pressed against the bleeding wound. Vanessa stood above us, breathing heavily, faint tears filling her eyes. "You see what kind of individuals they are," she exclaimed dramatically. "First theft and now physical violence." Madison folded her arms, nodding with feigned sorrow, perfectly portraying the role of the wronged party. However, not everyone present was convinced. Across the room, a few guests exchanged glances filled with suspicion. Someone produced their mobile phone, this time not to capture images of the wedding, but to initiate a call. I overheard the urgent, hushed instruction. "Contact the police. Immediately." As I sat there bleeding and holding my terrified son, a profound and undeniable realization dawned upon me. This time they had crossed an unforgivable line, and there would be no possibility of retreating from the consequences. The penetrating wail of approaching sirens sliced through the dense, stunned silence that had fallen over the reception hall. Moments later, 2 police officers and a team of paramedics entered through the grand entrance, their expressions grave and professional. The assembled guests parted before them like water, creating a clear path directly towards me, where I was seated on the floor, blood trickling from the side of my head, tightly embracing a sobbing Leo. "I'm Officer Miller," one of the officers stated, kneeling down beside me. "Ma'am, are you capable of speaking? Are you severely injured?" I nodded, feeling dizzy from the pain but resolute in my determination to remain strong for Leo. The paramedics immediately commenced examining me, cleaning the wound and monitoring my vital signs. "You have a moderately deep cut on your temple," one of them remarked softly. "You will be all right, but you require rest." Leo remained clinging to my side, his small hands trembling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Officer Miller turned sharply to address the rest of the gathered assembly. "Who here can provide a precise account of exactly what occurred?" he demanded. Madison stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Insincere tears, clutching Vanessa's arm tightly. "It is all a misunderstanding," Madison wailed dramatically. "My daughter's valuable iPhone was stolen by that young boy." She pointed emphatically at Leo. Officer Miller's expression remained impassive. "And you physically attacked this woman over a missing mobile phone?" he inquired coolly. "It was not as simple as that," Madison retorted sharply. "She initiated the physical altercation. We were merely attempting to defend ourselves." Officer Miller's partner interjected, his voice sharp and assertive. "We will require immediate access to the venue's security camera footage." The visibly flustered venue manager, desperately wishing to prevent further scandal, hurried forward. "We have surveillance cameras covering the entirety of the reception area," he stated quickly. "I will retrieve the footage right away." As the manager departed towards the control room, the paramedics completed the bandaging of my head wound. They offered to transport me to the nearest hospital, but I gently shook my head. "I am staying," I stated firmly. "I wish to see this situation through to its conclusion." Officer Miller crouched down beside Leo and offered him a bottle of water. "You are displaying great courage," he said gently. "We will ensure that the truth is revealed." Leo nodded, his lower lip still quivering slightly. Simultaneously, guests began to engage in hushed conversations amongst themselves, the murmurs growing louder as they became aware that the flawless facade Vanessa and Madison had constructed was beginning to crumble. In less than 10 minutes, the venue manager returned, holding a remote control device. Officer Miller gestured for the footage to be displayed on the large monitor positioned near the entrance. A heavy, expectant silence settled over the room. I squeezed Leo's hand reassuringly. I did not know precisely what the cameras would reveal, but for the very first time in my life, I truly believed that the truth might finally possess a voice more powerful than their falsehoods. All eyes in the room were fixed intently on the large monitor as the security footage commenced playback. Initially, it depicted the guests socializing, dining, and engaging in conversation. Simply the typical cheerful commotion characteristic of a wedding reception. Subsequently, the camera's view zoomed in on the gift table and the adjacent dining area, the precise location where Vanessa's limited edition gold iPhone had purportedly vanished. Everyone watched in complete silence, and then it became unmistakably clear, as plain as day. Vanessa, still adorned in her glittering gown, discreetly moved away from her bridal party while everyone's attention was diverted elsewhere. She cast a quick glance around the area, then picked up her gold iPhone from her own table and subtly slid it deep inside her clutch handbag. There was absolutely no indication of Leo being anywhere in her proximity. Gasps of astonishment spread throughout the room. The footage continued to play. Moments later, Vanessa dramatically clutched her now empty table, shrieking loudly about her missing phone. Madison immediately rushed to her side, casting furious glares in the direction of our table without a moment's hesitation. The sequence of lies unfolded step by step on the enormous screen, leaving no room for doubt or alternative interpretation. Officer Miller folded his arms across his chest, his facial expression as unyielding as stone. He turned towards Madison and Vanessa, who now stood completely frozen, their faces devoid of color, their mouths opening and closing soundlessly. "You both orchestrated this entire incident," Officer Miller stated, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You fabricated a false accusation against a child and subsequently escalated the situation into a violent physical assault." Madison stammered weakly. It is not what it appears to be. She forced us into it. Save your explanations for the court, Officer Miller stated sharply. He signaled to his partner. Within a matter of seconds, both Madison and Vanessa were placed under arrest. You are being formally charged with assault, making a false police report, and child endangerment, Officer Miller declared, his voice resonating clearly throughout the entire hall. The assembled guests erupted into a whirlwind of whispers and murmurs. Mobile phones were raised, recording every single moment as Madison and Vanessa were handcuffed right there, still wearing their designer dresses and with their once perfect hair now beginning to show disarray. Vanessa attempted to plead with Jackson, who had remained standing stiffly to the side throughout this entire ordeal, his face etched with profound heartbreak. Jackson, please, she sobbed. Tell them this is absurd. It was merely a misunderstanding. Jackson gazed at her as if seeing her for the very first time, truly comprehending her actions, and the expression in his eyes conveyed with absolute certainty that there was no possibility of salvaging this situation. As Madison and Vanessa were being escorted towards the exit, Madison hurled one final venomous glare in my direction. This is entirely your fault, Victoria, she spat. But for the initial time, her words felt utterly devoid of power. I stood tall, despite the throbbing pain in my head and the slight trembling in my hands. I held Leo close to me because finally, after years of feeling invisible and silenced, the truth had spoken powerfully on our behalf. As the officers led Madison and Vanessa towards the entrance, the guests remained motionless, uncertain whether to speak, to move, or even to draw a breath. The magnificent, fairy tale wedding celebration had been transformed into a public catastrophe. And then Jackson, the man who had just moments before intended to take Vanessa as his wife, stepped forward. His face was stern, his jaw tightly clenched as he turned to face the assembled crowd. Vanessa, still restrained by handcuffs but desperately struggling to maintain some semblance of dignity, attempted to rush towards him. Jackson, please, she sobbed. This is all a terrible mistake. We can rectify this. He did not flinch. He did not reach out to her. He did not even soften his expression. Instead, he retrieved the microphone from the master of ceremonies, turned towards the guests, and spoke loudly and with clear articulation. I am aware that many of you gathered here today anticipating a celebration, Jackson stated, his voice steady and unwavering. However, today I came to the profound realization that I was on the verge of marrying an individual who would be willing to destroy the life of an innocent child merely to safeguard her own public image. A complete silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft gasps of some attendees, and the quiet clicking sound of someone recording the events with their mobile phone. I cannot and unequivocally will not marry someone capable of such profound cruelty, he continued, his voice resolute. Consequently, I am formally canceling this wedding ceremony and terminating our engagement immediately. Vanessa let out a heart-wrenching wail. No, you cannot do this, she shrieked, struggling against the restraining officers. Jackson's gaze did not waver in the slightest. This extends beyond merely what has transpired today, he stated, his voice becoming heavier with palpable emotion. This pertains to an entire lifetime characterized by falsehoods, by deception, and by sheer self-centeredness. He then turned to look directly at me, his eyes locking onto mine, and in that particular instant, something significant shifted. It was as though he perceived not only the humiliation I had been subjected to today, but also the accumulated years of rejection, betrayal, and silent suffering I had endured. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent pledge of his support. Madison continued to scream threats as she was being physically escorted out the door, still attempting to assign blame to me for everything that had occurred. Vanessa completely collapsed emotionally, her mascara smearing down her cheeks, her bridal gown wrinkled and dragging on the floor. Neither of them appeared powerful any longer. Neither of them seemed untouchable. They appeared exactly as they were. Broken, self-absorbed, and utterly defeated. As the police vehicles pulled away, their red and blue lights flashing rhythmically across the cobblestone driveway, I stood with Leo beside me, feeling the cool evening air against my bruised skin. For the initial time in my life I did not feel